So congratulations to you and to all of the staff at the Department of Foreign Affairs for your work in securing the seat on the Security Council. One of the issues that you mentioned is around multilateralism and how support for multilateralism has been under threat. And perhaps you might outline how we can, as policymakers and legislators, but indeed the UN itself, can promote concepts around multilateralism and around multilateral organisations. And tied to that, I suppose, specifically targeted at young people, the UN Youth Delegate Programme is a very successful programme, but maybe you might talk about how that might be expanded, because I think it's particularly important that we look at encouraging young people to take an interest in international affairs, but particularly in multilateral organisations and their role in peacekeeping or in trade or in other areas.
Thank you to Deputies Byrne and Gannon. Deputy Byrne, you raise a subject very close to our heart here. Every hour of every day, we, in everything we do, believe we're strengthening the multilateral system. And I think one of the reasons Ireland was elected to the Security Council, frankly, it's quite a big deal. 128 members, 2/3 of the General Assembly, chose us to represent them, is that we have always been regarded as a cheerleader and a consistent country in terms of reinforcing the values and principles that underlie multilateralism. I think the small country approach here is a very important issue to mention in terms of our angle of entry to multilateralism. In realpolitik, countries like Russia and China, United States, frankly, multilateralism is often seen as a la carte for a big power country. They could get on with their business, perhaps, without multilateralism. We would argue, though, that the nature of the challenges that these superpowers and small countries are facing today, challenges we've just heard about this morning in the discussion, like climate change, like terrorism, like indeed insecurity across borders, pandemics, the primary example of this. None of these have solutions in countries that have a nationalist or a protectionist agenda. So Ireland's support for multilateralism, I think, is now in many ways perversely being validated by what we see of the nature of the challenges the international system is trying to deal with. I would also say that Ireland's promotion and respect for international law, that it covers our human rights record, it covers the humanitarian law, which is very often, for example, in the case of Syria, these days we would see that as challenged. International humanitarian law and international human rights law underpin the structures for multilateralism, and that's what we do at the table. So we constantly will speak to that while showing that, in fact, multilateralism itself operates. I think the way we build public trust for multilateralism, frankly, like any form of governance, is to show that it delivers and that it works. And I would be the first, as a permanent representative of the United Nations, to say that the Security Council has not always covered itself in glory yet. To come to your second point, Deputy Byrne, about the role of youth, you're touching on a really critical issue, and I'm glad to say one where Ireland has a profile and leadership here at the United Nations. I've been delighted in my 3 years here, and I know all the visiting ministers at the General Assembly have also been very happy to be accompanied and to engage with Ireland's youth representatives. We consistently choose young, bright, articulate, creative people to express our view, and I'm always extremely proud, and we engage with them. But your question goes to how we can bring that to the Security Council. I can tell you that, just take one example of where we certainly plan to do it. I will tell you that we will have youth voices at that Security Council table. I'm constantly saying this famous nothing about us without us. Women and youth voices are missing from that Security Council table. And Ireland has worked very closely with the Secretary-General's youth representative, particularly coming back to Deputy Stanton's question on climate and climate insecurity. We actually have a position which Ireland supports in the headquarters of the United Nations, working on that very issue. Climate is an issue where we have seen youth, frankly, not just lead, but prod governments into action. And we believe that that's something that we should bring with us as a message, and indeed in a listening way, to the Security Council table. Ireland led with the Marshall Islands on bringing a whole youth dimension to the Climate Action Summit here last year. So youth voices have an important role to play at the Council table. We'll bring them to that table, and we will do that, frankly, not because with decades of experience like someone like myself in diplomacy, but because we are talking to the young people of Ireland, whom you invited, by the way, into your own chamber in the Dáil for a whole day on climate debate. And that was something that had huge resonance here. So just to say to you, it wasn't symbolic, it was substantive, and we will follow through on that. Deputy Gannon, you raised the question of Nagorno-Karabakh. Certainly a crisis that we are very preoccupied by. For now, we seem to have overcome at least the worst of the period of tension. We know that the Minsk chairs, the co-chairs, were involved in discussions in bringing a resolution between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Right now, I have to say, we're watching developments. I don't think we could in any way say that we have signed out from vigilance on the current situation on the ground. One of our primary concerns remains both the maintenance of the ceasefire, but importantly now, humanitarian access and addressing the humanitarian challenges on the ground for the people of the region of Nagorno-Karabakh itself. We know that hospitals, schools, important infrastructure in relation to the delivery of water and energy has been badly affected by the crisis. So we want a sustainable solution. This will mean dialogue, it will mean negotiation. But for now, the de-escalation of tensions holding a lot of rhetoric, of course, but we really want to see future hostilities avoided. Again, I come back to something that will be a focus for Ireland at the table on any of these situations, and that will be the protection of civilian population. So we will continue watching. The OSCE, of course, an important actor in the region as well, working very closely through all our missions to ensure that the situation is resolved. Deputy Gannon, just quickly, you also raised a very important issue in relation to water. You're absolutely right. I mean, at a very general level, we often hear just future wars will be about water. And of course, we see growing evidence that water is a source of tension. You raised areas like the Middle East. Of course, the Middle East is one critical area. We've seen in the area like Lake Chad, for example, where Mary Robinson, who was also a wonderful spokesperson, I have to say, for Ireland throughout the climate, throughout the campaign. Mary Robinson was the UN representative for Lake Chad, an enormous source of water support for that region in Africa, where the waters have receded tremendously, and another climate-related source of tension in the Lake Chad region. Just more recently, in the summer, on the Security Council, for the first time, we saw an informal discussion around the Ethiopian I think it's called the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Obviously a water issue disputed now between Ethiopia, Sudan and Egypt, very, very much something that could lead to further tension. And as I touched on Ethiopia already in my introductory remarks, certainly something we would watch very seriously. The Nile as a lifeline for all three countries. You know, seeing any tension break out around that would be of great concern. And Deputy, just to finish off, the issue of water, peace and security is a recognised subject for discussion and indeed for engagement here. I think it was back in 2017, Bolivia, then a member of the Security Council, hosted a meeting, an informal meeting, if I'm not wrong, I can correct myself on that, on water, peace and security. So the Council is aware and apprised of it. We would hope, of course, that it doesn't have to have its attention brought in the context of an outbreak of conflict on this, but it's a key issue. And in the work we will do on climate insecurity, going back to Deputy Stanton's original point on climate and security, we certainly know that water will become a critical issue. We know, I'll finish up on this, Chair, I'm sorry my answers may be a bit long. On the question of water, the small island states with whom we built such a close and I would really underline very important relationship in the last few years. Minister Coveney sat over the development of a strategy for the small island states as part of our development policy. Many of them have no access to fresh water. They import their water. And this is one of the complexities of this changing nature of instability. With the pandemic, while they had to close down their tiny islands to protect their populations, that meant they had to close down their economies. Many of them are tourism economies, which also means the available resources for them to import, for example, water, are now being reduced, or even to develop systems to desalinate water are now being critically reduced. So we see this one vicious circle feeding into another, and water very much a subject of concern right across the board. So thank you, Chair.